resulting in the creation of a few blank slides. So I want to apologize in advance for that. That wasn't happening this morning when we were testing it. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. We have a really important topic today, and I'm thrilled to have our presenters joining us. I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to iNACOL's leadership webinar. The title is Closing the Advanced Achievement Gap: How Educators Can Help High-Achieving, Low-Income, and Minority Youth Stay on Track. This is an incredibly important topic. I'm Susan Patrick, the President and CEO of iNACOL. I'll be facilitating this webinar today. Each month, iNACOL hosts leadership webinars on topics that hold national significance for the field of K-12 education reform, and specifically on blended and online learning issues of interest. This is a critical issue around equity and access. iNACOL's mission is to ensure that every student has access to a world-class education and quality blended and online learning opportunities that prepare them for a lifetime of success, regardless of their geography or background. We work to do this through our strategic priorities of supporting policy and practice, best practices for new learning models, quality standards, and policy to ensure access, equity, and excellence in education. So these new models of learning, whether online courses, blended learning, and competency-based pathways, enable highly personalized learning environments that have the potential to close achievement gaps by tailoring the educational experience for each student. Online courses also provide new course-taking opportunities anytime, anywhere, beyond sometimes limited offerings at a local school. To do right by kids, it is imperative that we keep quality and equity at the front and center to ensure the promise of these new learning models is fully realized. Today, I am pleased to welcome our distinguished panelists. Researchers from the Education Trust will present a new study on the advanced achievement gap, how disadvantaged students who are initially high achieving at the beginning of high school fall behind their peers. This research has important implications for the field of blended and online learning as we work to ensure college and career readiness for every student. We will also hear from an educator who is using blended and online learning as a strategy to close opportunity and achievement gaps in Alief Independent School District in Houston, Texas. During today's webinar, you'll see on the left-hand side, there is a chat box on the lower left-hand side. We encourage you to comment, ask questions as you listen to the presenters. I'll be moderating with those questions. There also is a polling function. If you look on the left side, about halfway down below my picture there on the screen, you'll see a hand to raise hands if you have a question, or you can type in the chat box. There's a polling feature with the letter A on it, which allows you to answer polls and respond. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and begin by introducing our presenters today. Christina Theokas is the Director of Research at the Education Trust. Marni Bromberg is a Research Associate at the Education Trust. And Debbie Vincent is the Instructional Technology Curriculum Specialist in Alief ISD in Houston, Texas. So let's begin. I'll turn it over to Christina and Marni. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Marni and I are really excited to share the findings of the research from our paper, Falling Out of the Lead. But before talking about the findings of the paper, we just wanted to introduce ourselves a little bit and the organization that we work for, in case people didn't know about us. But we work for an organization called the Education Trust. And the mission of our organization is to raise achievement for all kids, but we are specifically focused on closing the achievement gap for students of color and low-income students. And we do our work in a number of ways. Marni and I work on the data and research side of the house, but we also have folks who work on the policy and advocacy side. But sort of underlying all of our work is we like to call ourselves the data guys, and we feel it's really important to bring clear, objective data to bear on the conversations about equity and excellence in our schools. And we feel by looking at the data, people can have a clearer understanding of the problem, and hopefully the data can guide us in directions about what we can do differently to improve outcomes for students. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the trajectories of initially high-achieving students as they progress through high school and into adulthood. So we have a really powerful longitudinal data set where we can look at post-secondary readiness indicators for students and watching a similar group of students, how they fare on those outcomes as they move through high school. In addition to the quantitative data that we're going to share, we're also going to share advice that comes from high-achieving students. We had a chance to talk to a number of students who were identified as high-achieving early on, and we heard about their experiences in high school, and we really feel that their stories and advice really bring more nuance to the quantitative data and really help us better understand the problems that might exist in our schools. As part of the research, we also talked to a school about how they were creating excellent outcomes for all of their students, not just some of their students. So we'll talk a little bit about the strategy of a particular school. And then hopefully at the end we can have a robust discussion talking about the challenges that educators face in doing this work with students. So I think here's our first blank slide, and it's a little bit hard to talk about without people being able to see it. But basically, you know, as an organization, we're focused on equity and excellence, and with standards-based reform, there's been a lot of activity to really raise standards for students. And as a country, we've made progress with moving kids out of the below basic achievement level, and that was a necessary step to take, and it remains quite important as so many students are still in the bottom achievement category. But the reality is the achievement gap isn't just about bringing students up from the bottom, that the achievement gap exists along the achievement continuum. And when we look at advanced performance, we find that there are very few students getting to advanced levels of performance to begin with, particularly at high school. And then the students who are moving into those categories and the progress that we have seen over the last decade or so has been really only white and more affluent students getting there. So we really need to look at what we're doing to ensure the talent that already exists is being maintained and grown through our schools. I think I just moved on to the next blank slide. This one's a little bit easier to talk about, but just really quickly, the data set that we're using is called the Education Longitudinal Study. It started following students when they were sophomores in 2002. And they have been followed for 10 years up through 2012. It's a very powerful data set. It's sponsored by the National Center for Education Statistics, and the data are representative of 2.5 million high school students. So these trends that we see are telling us about how we're doing nationally for kids. So it's telling us the overall trends that exist out there. And before jumping into the data, we just wanted to give you two quick details about how we're talking about students. So in this study, we're focusing specifically on high-achieving students. And the way we identify the high-achieving students from the data set that we have is by looking at the students who are in the top quartile on a math and reading assessment that was given to all students in the study. The assessment is based on other major assessments, including NAEP and PISA and TIMSS for folks who know those studies. So they're very rigorous, well-developed assessments. And we look at the top quartile, and the top quartile means the kids who are doing better than 75% of the other students. So these are really the top performers. And then we also have a measure of socioeconomic status. So we're not just using free and reduced lunch here, but socioeconomic status describes the parental income, parental education, and occupational status of the families. And again, we break up that scale into quartiles, and we're looking at the lowest quartile to define our low SES students. So we just got a slide up there. We're going to move on and start talking about the data because that's the really interesting part.
So we're going to start, this is Marni Bromberg. Thank you all for having us. And we're going to start by talking about achievement at the beginning of high school and looking at who's actually performing in the top quartile when students start high school. But before we do that, we just want to jump in and start with a poll and want you to reflect on your own school or district, or a school or district that you know of. And just use the poll function to think about what percent of students of color do you think are high achieving. So about what percent are performing in that top quartile of performance at the beginning of high school? What would you estimate? So we'll give you a minute just to work the poll and enter a response.
Again, the poll is on the left-hand side. You'll see the letter A next to the hand-raised icon. So click on that letter and please make your selection. Thanks.
So we can see that some of you have written in, and you're pretty evenly spread between A, B, C, D, and E. So a lot of variation in responses, suggesting maybe we're not sure, and actually the most common modal response is E, not sure. So it seems like a lot of, I don't know if you all can see the results, but 6 people responded that they weren't sure. So that's a very honest reflection that this is not something that we typically track at the beginning of high school. A lot of times we're very aware of students who are maybe not proficient on exams before they enter high school, but a lot of times we're not actually looking at who's coming in ahead of the game. So when we looked at national data, we saw that there were actually very large achievement gaps when students enter high school. So looking at the top quartile, if we had true equity, we would see 25% of each group of students would be performing in the top quartile of achievers. But instead, we see that only 6% of Black students and 11% of Latino students are performing in the top quartile, compared to about 1/3 of Asian and white students. But interestingly enough, the 6 and 11% of students of color is representing a large number of students that are present in our nation's high schools. So for example, there are 42,000 Latino students who are performing in the top quartile, compared to actually only 33,000 high-achieving Asian students. So walking into a high school, you're actually more likely to see a high-achieving Latino student than you are to see a high-achieving Asian student. And that's just a function of the percentage of students who actually are in the population. There are many more Latino students in our nation's high school population than there are Asian students. And we see similar disparities when we looked at our data by socioeconomic status. So only 10% of low SES students are performing in the top quartile at the beginning of high school, compared to nearly half of high SES students. Again, though, there are a large number of low SES students, over 60,000, who are in our nation's high schools and very deserving of attention and stimulation and growth during high school. So we took a look following these students through high school at some of their post-secondary readiness indicators. And obviously one of the indicators that colleges greatly care about and that are also important for enrollment in post-secondary and progression through post-secondary is the courses that students take and the opportunities they have to learn rigorous material while they're in high school. So one of the things we looked at was the highest math course taken by high-achieving students by the end of high school. And we actually saw some good news that by race, when we looked at Black, Latino, and white students, they were about as likely to take rigorous math courses as one another. So you can see that about a quarter to a third of students reached calculus sort of across race groups, and these numbers are not statistically different from one another. So we see some equity by race when we looked at the highest math course that students took. However, when we looked at our data by socioeconomic status, we did see some differences. So here you can see that low SES students who start off high school as high achieving are much less likely than high SES students to reach calculus. Only 29% of low SES students reached calculus compared to 42% of high SES students, and this is a significant difference. So some different patterns by race and SES. However, when we looked at different measures of course taking, we saw pretty similar patterns as the one that I just showed you. So we also looked at indicators such as science course taking, the number of AP and IB courses that students took, and the percent of students completing a full academic curriculum consisting of a certain number of math, English, science and social studies, and foreign language credits. There was some equity by race, but not so much by socioeconomic status when we were just observing that group of students that started off as high achieving at the beginning of high school.
Can I just interrupt for a question? On the percentages that you're using, is the reference to a percentage of the total student population, or is this a percentage of a particular specific group? Just to clarify that.
Yep, sure. Sorry I didn't make that clear. The slides before, we were looking just at students who started off as high achieving. So when we look at the full population of students, we actually do see some inequities in the percent of students taking Algebra 2 or Calculus, for example. But when we just examine high achievers by race, we see that Black high achievers, Latino high achievers, and white high achievers are about as likely to take advanced math courses.
Thank you.
And the slide before that was showing the 25, the top quartile, that was showing of all Black students, of all Latino students, of all white students, what percent is making it into the top quartile. So that one was a little different.
Okay, great.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to some other indicators that we looked at. And now here again, we're just looking at high achieving students. So another indicator that sort of matters for credit accrual and progression through college is success on AP exams. So you'll remember that Black and Latino and white students were about as likely as one another if they were high achieving at the outset to take AP courses. But when we look at their exam pass rates, we find that Black and Latino students pass a much smaller share of the AP tests that they take than initially high achieving white students. And we see similar inequities when we look at our results by SES. So again, low SES students are passing a smaller share of the AP tests that they take than high achieving high SES students. So this is from another presentation. We apologize about that. But now we just want to hear from you all again. So we saw some pretty big disparities on AP exams, and we're going to hear from students in just a minute about kind of their experiences in their courses. But first we'd like to hear your reflections and hear from you about why do you think that high achieving students of color are passing fewer of the AP exams they take as compared to white students, given that they exhibited a similar level of achievement at the beginning of high school. So we'll give you a minute to just type that into your chat box on the left of your screen, and we'd love to hear some of your reflections. Okay, so we've started to have some comments roll in, and we have someone who is talking about a study in higher ed, talking about supports in their courses. We certainly found that that was part of the explanation when we talked to students. We'd actually love a link to that study. If you could send it to us, we'd love to see it. We also saw some responses about racial bias in the tests, perhaps, peer influence, and possibly another one about home experiences and supports from home. So certainly all of these things, and we'll give you another minute as we sort of talk to write in, and we encourage you to do so. But certainly all of these things could be playing a role in the differences we see, and actually we do not test why these differences are occurring, but they do certainly point us in a direction that students are pretty similarly likely to take courses but not doing as well in courses. So our kind of where that led us is perhaps there's something happening inside of those courses that's leading to different outcomes in pass rates. So I'll turn it over to Christina again, and she'll talk to us a little bit about what we heard from students when we spoke with them.
Yeah, and we appreciate people still typing in responses, because it's good to hear a range of responses. And I think some of the students' experiences and what they told us are actually quite related to one of the comments that just came in terms of having a less vigorous academic program. And so we first just wanted to show you, or tell you the students that we talked to and where they came from. So these are recent high school graduates. They had finished high school in May, and we were talking to them in September. And a majority of them were actually enrolled in college at the time when we were talking to them, and they really enjoyed reflecting back on their high school experience and kind of in comparison to where they were in their post-secondary experiences that they were having. So the students all came from the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation that has a scholars program, a young scholars program. The students are identified in 8th grade as high achieving, and they are all low-income students with the average family income being about $25,000. And once they are accepted into the program, they receive substantial guidance and support and financial support to help develop their skills and the talents that they do have. And these students attended different schools across the country, public and charter schools, and they had different experiences kind of both within their schools and then between the students at the different schools that they went to. So we want to show you some of the ways that they talked about their courses. And I think overall the big takeaway was that course quality varied tremendously amongst the students. And I think for Marni and I, what was really nice to hear when we were talking to the students is that they're, I think we sometimes forget just how savvy students are and just how aware they are of the work that they're being asked to do and what that means in regard to rigor and how people are thinking of them and the expectations they have of them. You can see on the slide that the first student said, I took a lot of AP courses, but even my regular courses were rigorous. So she didn't have to be in an AP class to experience that rigor. She experienced that across her other classes as well. Another student made it to calculus, so she's one of the lucky low-income students who did make it to calculus. But when she was in that class, she's like, it wasn't really calculus. Like, she knew very clearly that she wasn't being challenged and she wasn't being given the same curriculum that other students might be learning in a calculus class. And then the last comment from another student was crossword puzzles made up 60% of our grade and exams only made up 10. So he could really look at the assignments that he was being given and really could see if they were rigorous or not and if he was going to be growing in that class. So we can see some real variety in the rigor that these high achieving students experience. So these are the students who had been identified. They were having external support. So for some of the folks who have written about not having the support outside of school, these students had that and they still had this diverse experience in their courses. The next slide is a blank one, and this slide is talking about how the students felt the teachers, their perception of teachers and their willingness to help them. And some students really felt like they got a lot of support from their teachers. From one student saying, I had so many teachers go above and beyond the call of duty to help me. Some other students saying they felt like their teachers were there because they had to be. So there was just a real variety in how they experienced support from the teachers. And one of the students added, which was really pretty insightful, of like how students experience teacher behaviors and actions. And he said, when teachers don't take the initiative to explain things to students or help them learn it, students don't feel like they can turn to their teachers for that type of help. So some of the teachers, might be thinking, I have advanced students in my class, I'm not going to explain it, they're going to have to kind of reach out and do that if they need help from me. But the students experience that as a teacher not being willing to help them, and then they felt like they can't have that type of support. And then the last one is, the next slide is also blank from the students. And this is when we asked them about the type of preparation they received from their school and their guidance counselors for post-secondary study. So these are very high achieving students. These are the students that we expect and anticipate will go to college. And the students, again, had real varied experience. One of the students talked about having really strict rules about applying to college, when they would get their applications done. And there was a real emphasis on getting the applications done early in November, and then having a counselor who would really help them work out scholarships and financial aid for the rest of the year. Knowing for these students, applying to very selective colleges can be quite daunting, and thinking about the cost. But not letting that be a barrier for the students. So they're going to you're going to get in, and then we're going to figure out how to make the financial aid and the scholarships work so you can take advantage of that opportunity. And then for a student in another school, they just feel like they didn't get any information at all, and the students felt really overwhelmed because they didn't know what to do. They perhaps didn't have other family members who had gone to college. They didn't have that external support outside of school that they needed to figure out how to negotiate a very complex pathway to get to college.
So we heard from some of our students, and actually one of the students we spoke to coincidentally attended a school called Columbus Alternative High School, which we had sort of identified. At the Ed Trust, we're always sort of looking for exemplar schools that we can learn from and share their practices with other educators. And we had come across Columbus Alternative High School in kind of a separate scan of Ohio data when we were looking for exemplar high schools. And one of the students we spoke to actually attended Columbus Alternative High School. And she was the student who experienced kind of even quality rigor across her courses, in AP courses and non-AP courses. She had a very positive experience at her school. So we'll share with you kind of some of what we learned from Columbus Alternative High School, as well as some of that student's reflections. And we'll also kind of share some of the students' advice for other high schools who are serving high-achieving, low-income students and students of color. Just first, so that you know a little bit about Columbus Alternative High School, which is called CAS for Insiders. This is a grade 9 through 12 school, and students are admitted through lottery. It's a school of choice within Columbus, Ohio. It serves about 600 students, and the school is 65% African American, 26% white, 61% low income, and it has about a 98% graduation rate. So it's getting nearly all of its students at least to graduation. And you can see on the graph on the right that the vast majority of students are taking AP courses. 66% of graduates in 2011 took at least one AP course, compared to 35% of students in the state. And also a greater percentage of graduates are passing AP courses than are students in the state. So here we have another blank slide, but starting with some advice that we heard from students. What we heard kind of from many students is that they wanted rigorous opportunities in their high schools that exposed them to college-level content and expectations before they actually went to college. So one of the students said, start early. And that's kind of exactly CAS's approach to providing instruction to students. So as an example, CAS gives its students summer work before they even start high school in order to sort of initiate them into the CAS way. Students have to read 3 novels before they enter their freshman year, and they have to compose a draft essay that's actually incorporated, oh there it is, that's actually incorporated into their grade in their 9th grade courses. In addition, the school only offers honors courses. There are no remedial or tract courses like you often see in kind of comprehensive high schools across the country. And finally, the school has 7 advanced placement courses that they offer, so really a wide array. It also offers the IB program, and they expect all students to either take AP or IB English by their junior year in order to ensure that students have at least 1 college level experience before they graduate. And here we have another blank slide, but I'll just kind of share some of the takeaways from students in terms of advice for their schools for other schools that are serving high achieving students. So one message that we heard loud and clear was that students really wanted mentorship from the adults around them in high school. A lot of the students we talked to discussed mentors that they had that really played a large role in their engagement in high school, and especially in helping them apply to college and helping them figure out what they wanted to do post-secondary. And the final thing that we heard, this is a really powerful comment from one of the students who said, what holds back a lot of students is people tell them no. And what she was talking about, and what other students talked about, was hearing messages from adults, whether intentional or not, that kind of signaled to them what was possible for their future. So it signaled to us that adults really need to monitor the messages that they're sending to students about what is possible for their futures, and not implying to students that only certain pathways are open to them because of their background and because of their home life. And I'll just breeze through. We followed the students in our data through to post-secondary, and what we found was that the outcomes that we saw beforehand in terms of their post-secondary readiness, it really followed them through after high school. So here you can see we followed initially high-achieving students of color 2 years after high school, and what we found is that even though black and white high-achieving students were about as likely to enroll in 4-year colleges, they were much less likely, black students were much less likely, as were Latino students, to enroll in highly selective 4-year colleges and universities. So you can see that only 19% of initially high-achieving black students went into a highly selective 4-year college, compared to over a third, 34% of high-achieving white students. High-achieving Latino students were less likely to enroll in college at all, and were much more likely than high-achieving white students to enroll in 2-year colleges. And we saw sort of similar patterns by socioeconomic status, suggesting that these post-secondary readiness indicators that students are experiencing in high school and the disparities along those important signals for college are really holding students back once they graduate from high school and try to enroll in college. So we're going to turn it over to Debbie, but we hope that you can reflect on this data, and we look forward to a good question and answer period when you have an opportunity to reflect on some of this.
Thank you, Marni.
Oh, and just before we end, we have a question about highly selective colleges. That's actually defined by the average ACT scores of students entering college. So I'm blanking on what the actual cutoffs are, but they actually look at the 25th percentile of ACT of entering freshmen, and the cutoffs are kind of increasingly higher as you move up the ladder of selectivity.
Thank you. Thanks, Marni.
I urge you to check out our full report, and I'll turn it over to Debbie now.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off there for a second. This is Susan thanking Marni and Christina, and we'll come back and have more time for questions. Feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, but you can really see the effects of counseling, supports, mentorship, and high expectations. I thought that comment on communicating positive really tied into the notion of student holistic wellness and well-being and getting to those yes statements. So yes, we will move ahead here. Debbie, Vincent, thank you for joining us, and we are looking forward to your presentation as a follow-up from the practitioner side on how you look at closing achievement gaps and gaps in course offerings. So over to you, Debbie. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just a little bit about who I am. I'm here in Alief ISD, Houston, Texas, and one of my charges is to oversee our distance learning program, so identifying students to take online courses. Prior to that, I had the opportunity to work for the Texas Virtual School Network, in which we looked at all of the online courses offered in the state of Texas and made sure that the rigor of the course was there. So from our previous presenters, when we talked about the variety of courses and the teachers and things like that, that still affects distance learning, but one of the things that we do is all of our courses go through a very rigorous review process to ensure that they align with the TEKS and that they also are very rigorous. So that's a little bit about me. Let me tell you about Alief. We are a recognized school district in the state of Texas, that's a good thing. Our district encompasses 36 miles, so we're not a small school district, we're very large. You can see that we serve about 45,000 students in our district. We do have a very large population in terms of the languages, the ESL students that we serve, and we have 45 campuses. Of our population, we have 89% economically disadvantaged. So, you know, we really do cater to high achieving students that have backgrounds right now that are possibly at risk. And so there are a lot of things that we do to help our kids be successful. So we're going to take a look at some of those things that we do in Alief. One of the things that we particularly pay attention to is our district is committed to providing site coordinators who help students make course choices. We have lab facilitators or facilitators who meet with the students regularly to make sure that they're getting a positive message. We ensure that our course content is very rigorous, and we put money towards it. So a lot of things that typically could hold students back in terms of charging them for courses, our district doesn't do that. We provide those online courses at no cost to our students, and that includes our college courses as well. So a little bit about our distance learning program. What you see here in this graphic is that we have served quite a few students through our years. One of the reasons that you see a significant drop right in here between 2010 and 11 was state funding went away. Prior to that, the state offered funding for courses, and so now districts had to pick up the cost of all of the courses that they were allowing students to take. we have seen an increase slowly. Again, districts are learning how to fund our students, and so you can slowly see that we are growing the number of kids that we're able to serve through distance learning. In our district, we're really pleased. We've put in some structures in place, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. But of our students who are taking online courses, you can see that each year we have increased our success rate. So last year, 96% of our kids were successful in their online AP dual credit courses that they took. So we're proud of that, and you'll see how we achieved those success rates. How is success defined? That's a very good question. We define success in the state of Texas as achieving 70 or better. However, I can tell you from helping my kids, our kids in Alief are really achieving at 85% on their scores or better in their coursework. So the state defines it as 75, but in our district, we look for a little bit higher standard. The number of kids that we serve through dual credit. So these are our kids that are actually taking dual credit courses their junior and senior years. Again, you can see that our numbers have increased over time. We are pushing our campuses to identify students to take a virtual course, because we know post-secondary education at some point they will have to take an online course. So we're encouraging that also to happen. So one of the structures that we have in place is that each of our campuses in our district have a trained site coordinator. And that site coordinator job is to advertise distance learning opportunities to their campuses to make sure that students are aware that the opportunity exists. They also identify prospective distance learning candidates. So they will start looking at their 9th graders who are high achievers and introduce them to some distance learning courses. We'll talk about where that happens also. Then they actually sit down and meet with their distance learning candidate, and they pull the course syllabi off of the websites, because they want the kids to understand that there are high expectations and that these courses are rigorous. They're not for course recovery purposes, and that allows them to kind of see what they're committing to, because it is a commitment on the student's behalf. I also meet monthly with my site coordinators. So we look at student progress, identifying students. They ask lots of questions about candidates, prospective candidates, and we look at history of their coursework, previously in other courses, to see if it aligns with their graduation plans. And then the site coordinators also monitor how students are doing as well. They're not the first line that monitors it, but they are in that process, so that they know that they've made a solid match between a student and a particular course in distance learning. Here's where we really look at supporting our particular students that take online courses. And so when Christina and Marni were talking about the support that we give students and that positive message, this is where my facilitators come in. Each campus has a facilitator. They oversee 10 to 15 students taking distance learning courses. They have gone through a facilitator training course, so they understand what their role is. It is our expectation that they meet with their student at least once a week. And when they're doing that, they're checking in, they're showing the students that they are interested, that the student is not disconnected just because they're taking an online course, that there is someone that is going to help them. And I'm sure, you already know this, one of the biggest things about taking an online course is that student management of time. They're not strong managers yet of their time, and so my facilitators really help them lay out a plan and stay on course with their courses that they're taking. These facilitators do turn in a log, a report to me every 2 weeks so that they understand what their responsibilities are, that I can help them if there's anything that comes up as an alarm, if a student is struggling, we get on top of it before it becomes, unreasonable to settle. They are the first line of support for my students if the student is struggling with making a connection to their course instructors. My facilitators jump in and make that contact to support our students. They also help find resources. So if we see students in a science class need science materials, again, we do not place that burden on our students. My facilitators locate those resources and materials. They'll set up a time for the students to work in a school lab so that it's a safe environment. If they need tutoring, if they're struggling in a math course or another course, they will find those tutoring services at the campus to provide all of that support. So we don't just put kids in courses. We make sure that once they're in the course that they are being supported all through their journey during that semester for achieving the success. But I don't want to just say that it's all up to our facilitators or that it's up to the site coordinators. We really look to the candidates that we are putting in our program, in our distance learning program. So there are some things that our distance learning candidates have to kind of prove to us. They have to be, set forth an initiative that they can handle this. So one of the things is they have to demonstrate prior academic success in any course that leads up to a particular course that they're interested in taking. They have to complete a distance learning application in which they write an essay about why taking this course will help them reach their graduation goals. And we do take those essays seriously. We do read through them. And they do help us determine how serious a student is about taking their online courses. Another part is we ask our kids to go through the clue-in test that Texas Virtual School Network provides, and it gives them an online experience and talks to them about managing their time, and it's just a great introductory into what online learning is. And then our site coordinators help our students enroll in the college, because to take a dual credit course, they have to be enrolled in that college. So our site coordinators are there to help them through that registration process, which is introductory to a further, once they graduate, what college registration is like, and that is an experience. And then the candidate also needs to understand that they are responsible for meeting with their facilitator weekly. And, quite honestly, I tell my facilitators they're like bulldogs. You've got to hunt the kids down sometimes. They can't just passively think that the teenager is going to walk in and say, hey, how's it going? So they do know that sometimes they're going to have to hunt those students down. One of the other things that we are working on in our district is creating blended courses. And we started with our CTE Principles of Information courses, and we're looking at business information. And these are courses that our 9th graders go through. And we felt like offering a blended environment to our 9th graders would give them a scaffolding and support while still exposing them to a digital environment. And then once they successfully complete those courses, as 10th graders, we invite them to consider taking an online course. So that's one of the things that we do to help kind of introduce online learning to our kids and kind of support them in their growth. So that's my part of the presentation. Very quickly, talking about what we do here in Alief. So I'm going to turn it over back to Susan, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, and again, thanks to all of our presenters. Would love any questions. I realize we're at the top of the hour, so those who can stay on, and hopefully our presenters can stay on for just a few minutes to answer any questions. This session is being recorded and archived, so you could go back, and we will also work on providing the slides as well as the archive link so you can see the full range of graphs. Apologize for the formatting issues on the upload. Thank you to our presenters. I'm not seeing any questions right now come up, but I think there is a connection here between what we're seeing in terms of advanced students and these gaps in expectations and gaps in offerings. So one of the questions is, Marni and Christina, just to wrap up, you covered a ton of great material. What are the 2 to 3 takeaways for teachers and administrators from your research findings?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and challenging us to boil it all down. I think the big takeaway, I think there are 2 things. One, we think that educators need to look at their data and make sure they're identifying and know who the high achieving students are in their schools, so they can ensure that they're getting into the courses and having the opportunities and experiences that they need to continue to grow their skills. So I think it's sort of a 2-part strategy, because I think oftentimes we leave it up to the kids to figure that out themselves, but really the educators need to take responsibility for that so we can start changing some of the patterns that exist in our courses. And then I think the second part of it is partly a leadership issue, where we really need someone who is really rigorously monitoring course quality and course content and ensuring that kids across classes, across teachers, within content areas are really being challenged at that same rigorous level. A lot of times that we make inadvertent decisions about kids, or not even sort of being challenged to think about the expectations we have for kids. Sometimes we're thinking, well, let's make it a little bit easier. These kids have a lot of things going on outside of school, but clearly the kids told us that they want rigor, they want to be pushed, and that's what's going to keep them on track. If they don't have that, they will slip off track. So they really need the educators, their teachers, their counselors, their principals, to be maintaining that high-level environment for them.
And just 2 follow-up great questions by John Branham. Did you guys develop and use a survey for these kids is the first question, and the follow-up, it would seem like we could secure additional clarity from them, the students, about what strategies were particularly helpful and why.
Yeah, so we conducted in-depth interviews with them. We had an interview protocol that we used, but really gave them the opportunity to talk to us about their experiences in high school and how they viewed their coursework and how that coursework prepared them for college. And Going to the second question, we actually heard pretty clearly from them about what they considered to be high quality coursework. And it was interesting, across the students, they actually spoke about it in pretty similar ways. So a lot of the students talked about classes where they had to memorize, or kind of classes that were based heavily in remembering things from textbooks as sort of low quality, and really wanted to be pushed and asked to do more than that. And when they were talking about their high quality courses, they talked about courses that they were asked to write in. So a number of students talked about writing research papers and having to dig into topics on their own. And then a number of students talked about actually teachers and instructors helping them make connections between their coursework and sort of things that were happening maybe in other courses or in their communities or society more generally, and really helping them forge the connections between the things they were learning in class and broader portions of their life.
Very interesting, that integration and adaptation and the application of knowledge across different areas. I want to wrap up. I don't see any more questions, and I know we've gone over, and just give a huge round of applause for our presenters, Marni and Christina and Debbie, for joining us today. I feel like we could go on for another hour just digging into the student responses. This is such an incredibly important topic, and I want to thank you for your work, your terrific research, and the work that EdTrust does every day to ensure equity, and let us know how we can be partners in supporting your work. Thanks to everybody who has attended today, and this will be archived and we can provide the slides. So thank you. Thanks for all of your patience, and thanks for the good work you're doing for the kids. Bye-bye.